All right, we are live with Old Earth Creationism with Dark Knighte Apologeticz, and I have here with me Dark Knighte Apologeticz, who's going by Jeremy. So, Jeremy, why don't you tell us about yourself a little bit?
Yeah, uh, there's not much to tell. I just have a YouTube channel. I, oh, I'm just a guy that studies the Bible a lot.
All right, and so normally my channel focuses pretty heavily on young Earth creationism, um, and I've noticed that you are fairly frequently in the comments and the chat agreeing with various things that I'm saying. And so I wanted to get a handle on what exactly it is that you have that you would say makes you an old Earth creationist as opposed to someone who wouldn't necessarily identify as a creationist. So what is old Earth creationism to you?
It's basically just something that accepts mainstream science and tries to combine it with Christianity.
Okay. Now there are some old Earth creation groups like Hugh Ross's group. Is that Reasons to Believe? I think it is.
Yes, it is reasons to believe. I do follow his ministry a lot.
Okay. Now they are pro deep time, pro astronomy isn't lying to us, but they're also anti evolution, at least in the sense of common descent. Where do you stand on that?
I do think that there is a little bit of common descent, but I have a hard time seeing it for things like dinosaurs and birds, or humans and ape ancestry.
Okay. So, but you do agree with Hugh Ross and his ministry that the universe is about 13 and a half-ish billion years old. I mean, I'm not really an astronomy or cosmology guy, so if I get this wrong, audience, let me know. But that the various galaxies that we can see are billions of light years away, and that the Earth has been around for about 4.5 billion years, and things like that.
Yeah, yes, I do agree with all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, so you had said that you were someone who doesn't reject mainstream science, but I think it would be hard to argue that common descent isn't an aspect of mainstream biology.
Yes, biology does have a lot of that common descent thing, but reasons to believe has their own creation model that
What is
that
that?
does make predictions.
Okay. What is the? Could you describe the model for me? Because I'm not very familiar with it.
It's a interesting model. It basically replaces common descent with common design. I haven't read much about it, but a lot of what's about that model is in their books, and I haven't purchased very many of those books.
Well, how do you understand it?
Well, I basically understand it that it's basically like a non-Darwinian version of evolution, where they have a God interfering with the history of life on Earth.
Okay. And does he do this by selectively breeding organisms, creating the mutations that he wants? Does he create new organisms de novo?
I would say creating the mutations he wants.
Okay. Now, is there some way that we could tell the difference between I guess can we say a miraculous mutation and a natural mutation? Is there a difference?
I would think there would be a difference, but I'm not exactly sure how you would test for that.
Okay. So I guess that would mean then that there is this common descent, wouldn't it? It's just that God is pushing it in particular ways.
I guess you could say that.
Okay. Because it sounds to me like if God is introducing these mutations, and you think that is the primary way in which he is guiding evolution, then it would still be true that, say, humans and chimpanzees would have a common ancestor. It's just that at some point after that split, God was putting in mutations in one side of this lineage of apes to get to humans.
Well, there is that whole Imago Dei thing,
Right. The image of God.
Yeah, the image of God.
Yeah.
And I see TD Lane mentioned Sentinel Apologetics. Yes, I do follow that.
All right. But so the Imago Dei prevents there from being a common ancestry between humans and chimpanzees?
I don't know if you would say that, but I don't exactly know how to describe the image of God. It has signatures that you can see, like complex language, advanced tool design, those kind of stuff.
Oh, and Sentinel Apologeticz is in the chat. Hey, Sentinel Apologeticz. There you go. And actually, you know what, Sentinel Apologeticz, if sometime you want to have a discussion, I would be open to discuss what you would like to talk about. So feel free to shoot me an email. And we got a lot of people here. We got Brainbug, we got James Downer, we got TD Lane, Jens Van Brocko. Hey, all you guys who are joining from Europe, thank you for stopping in. I like to make these Saturday streams at a time when you can watch them. So I really appreciate you being here. And yeah, I'm sorry that most of my uploads are at times that are just terrible for you. But okay, so it seems like, though, that all of these things like tool use and language capacity and things like that, we know that they can be interrupted via injuries or even genetic defects in humans, right?
Yes, I would definitely agree with that.
Okay. So it still seems like that could be something that would be caused by mutations, that mutations would be the basis of the genetics allowing humans to perform these functions.
Well, there isn't very much detail on how God introduced the Imago Dei in the Bible.
Right. I mean, I would agree there. I think that the authors did not intend Genesis 2 to be taken overly literally. And so I think that when God says, now let us form man in our image, that the metaphor being used here is that God is sculpting man out of, the dust of the ground in the way that someone would, make a sculpture out of clay or something. And that by doing that, he's making a self-portrait, but not in some literal sense. That would be what I would think that the authors were trying to convey with that. And I think it's actually fairly obvious that they're probably not trying to say that God looks like some dude. But then again,
yes.
Maybe they are.
Yes, I would definitely agree that it is a metaphor. It's very much symbolic language. I would definitely agree with that.
Okay. So I guess I'm confused then. If all the things that we're identifying as part of this Imago Dei, these this creative capacity, this rational capacity, perhaps even a certain high degree of self-awareness, if all of those can be interrupted physiologically and genetically, then they must have some physiological and genetic basis. So I'm still not clear what it is that interrupts any kind of common descent between having the Imago Dei and evolution. Couldn't that be something that, I guess, took shape over time?
I think it's something that needs further study in science.
Okay. Oh, and Sentinel Apologeticz, it's your first time on the channel? Well, awesome. I'm glad you're here. Be nice to everyone in the chat. Not my chat is nice. I've got a nice chat. So what kinds of study could be done to learn more about this Imago Dei? Is there a way we could investigate it?
I think there would be a way that you could investigate it in biology and geology and different fields of science, but
Okay. Well, for that, we would need a pretty clear definition of it. So, is that something that we have available?
Reasons to Believe might have given a definition at some point in time, but I don't think I've ever read it.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. So, are there any mutations in particular that you think are likely to have been caused by direct divine interference?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So, now, if it's my understanding that you have on, I think your Twitter profile or something, you have progressive creation. Now, my understanding for progressive creation is not what you've described. So I guess I'm still not clear if what do you understand is what you've described what you understand by progressive creation?
Well, the terms progressive creationism and old earth creationism are very much used interchangeably.
Okay. Because to me, looking at things like, I'm sorry, I got a little frog in my throat. So when I look at things like, the history of the philosophy of science and the history of scientific ideas and the history of theology, progressive creationism traditionally was this idea that God creates various, essentially, biospheres at certain times during Earth's long history. So at some point, he created the sort of Cambrian biosphere, and he was like, oh, I'll toss in a weird shrimp monster, and we'll put in some little spider crab looking things, and we'll toss in some coral and some jellyfish and a worm that kind of looks like a fish. And then after a while, he was like, okay, I'm kind of done with that. Let's toss in, some jawed fish, and we'll get in some giant scorpions, and that'll be fun. And then then we get like the Devonian period, and then eventually he's like, let's mix it up a little bit, and we'll get in some things that are like frogs but have giant teeth and tails, and amphibian crocodiles and things like that, and dragonflies the size of your body, and so on, all the way up until eventually in a few thousand years ago, or a few tens of thousands of years ago, he finally gets to getting humans out there. So that is not what you would describe as your understanding of creation.
Well, I would definitely agree that the Cambrian explosion is a huge marker for God interfering with the history of life on Earth, but some of that stuff does sound a little bit weird.
Okay. So what is it about the Cambrian explosion that makes you think that this is I guess just for shorthand, I'm going to say miraculous whenever we have the intervention of God in the course of events that otherwise would not have occurred that way without such intervention. Is that an acceptable use of the word for you?
Yes, that is.
Okay. Yeah. And that's a definition I think is fairly common in a lot of circles dealing with theism and the interference of God in the world. It's that idea for miraculous. So, all right, what is it about the Cambrian explosion that makes it seem miraculous to you in the way that perhaps some other transitions between geological periods might not seem as obviously miraculous, at least?
Well, I would have to say it's the speed at which it happened. It seems like it happened at such a quick speed that it just doesn't seem like it could have happened any other way.
Okay. Well, I mean, it did happen over the course of, a few tens of millions of years. What's so fast that it can't be natural? Like where does that assessment come from?
Well, it's kind of hard to explain, but it just seems like it happened really fast.
Okay, so it's sort of a gut feeling.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, but I guess then the question I have is that it doesn't seem like any of the developments in the Cambrian are particularly revolutionary. It's just that as certain relatively minor anatomical modifications were made to earlier, even more basal organisms, it opened up the possibility of filling new niches, and then there was an adaptive radiation. I mean, we see similar things like after the end Permian extinction, right? We have first the dicynodonts that survived absolutely explode across the scene and become the dominant herbivores on land across the entire world. And then the various diapsid clades, whether Lepidosauromorph or Archosauromorph, diversify to take up almost every other available niche. And very quickly into the Triassic, we go from having almost, just devastated biodiversity. And here I'm just talking on land because my area of most study in this topic tends to be vertebrate paleontology. So I don't want to make stuff up about the oceans that I don't know. So, but that also happens fairly quickly during the Triassic, and then at the end of the Triassic we have another mass extinction, and it's the dinosaurs that greatly diversify. Whereas at the end of the Triassic, basically there were some medium to large herbivores, and there were some guys eating some meat, and ornithischians barely existed. Are those all miracles after those extinctions where there's a new adaptive radiation?
I would say yes. And just to clarify, everyone, no, my gut is not my source. Mostly RTB is.
Okay. I mean, to be fair, I think most people believe a lot of the things that they believe because it seems reasonable. While I do appreciate the ability to go and find sources for things, like when someone's like, "Oh, hey, why do you think it might be a good day to go for a walk?" I'm like, "I don't know, because it feels like it is." Like, I do think that not every single thing you believe has to be examined down to scientific detail. It depends on how important it is to you and how important it is to your daily life and how interesting you find the topic. So,
Right.
so it seems like any adaptive radiation is a sign that there may have been some kind of miracle going on in the DNA. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. Now, do you think that during adaptive radiations there would then be like a higher mutation rate or something?
I would think so.
Okay. So does that include even relatively minor adaptive radiations, like say, we have a new volcanic island form in the ocean, and some initial colonists get there, and then there's going to be an adaptive radiation amongst the initial, usually birds, insects, and plants with relatively light seeds that are going to land there and start a new ecosystem. Does God directly interfere there too?
Well, I would think some stuff would be purely left up to natural processes, but uh, other more big stuff, more major things would probably need his interference.
Okay. And I just want to answer a quick question from the chat from Sentinel Apologeticz, who said, "Are you Christian/atheist? Just notice you're doing a good job with Hovind." I do try to do a good job with Hovind. We have more Hovind stuff coming up on Tuesday live, but that is actually a question I don't answer on this channel. Yeah, my personal religious views are something I leave off of this channel, and it is for me to discuss privately with people who know me under, like my actual name and know me in person, things like that. So I don't worry about it. I'm not upset by the question. It's just that's a question that I don't really answer. So do you have? I'm sorry. Back to you, Jeremy. Is there do you have any evidence or sources as to why or that adaptive radiations correlate with higher mutation rates?
I cite RTB a lot, but I don't know where I could get those sources.
Okay. Because it seems like that would be something that we could probably check on to some degree, because there have been adaptive radiations recently enough in history that we could check, the amount of divergence in genetic variation between these relatively recent radiations versus, older ones.
Yeah, RTB definitely has proposed some tests that you could do to see if their model is correct.
Okay. What are some of those things? Because I'm actually, like I said, I'm unfamiliar with their work on biology.
Well, they have a list of some of those tests on their website.
Okay. Do you have a favorite one?
Not really, no.
Oh, that's okay. So I guess it does seem like you're believing in common descent, but I don't think that RTB does. Or am I mistaken about that?
Uh, they mix in some common descent, but mostly it's common design.
Okay. How would you tell the difference?
Uh, I'm not sure.
Okay. Because it seems like we have a really good. And by the way, RTB is Reasons to Believe. That is, it's. I want to say it's Hugh Ross's ministry, but I don't know if he actually owns it, or I don't know exactly what the relationship is there. Does he actually own Reasons to Believe?
Yes, he does. He's the founder.
Okay, so there you go. Sorry, my knowledge on Hugh Ross is mostly restricted to his work on astronomy and cosmology, where I don't really have any particular issues with it. Not that I know enough to really be able to pick it apart if there were any big issues. But I don't find him off that I noticed there. So, but the common design, common descent thing always seems to be a little odd to me, because it seems like, so like, let's say there's a common design thing, right? Like I do stuff in, like I do some 3D stuff, right? And I can take assets and shove them into completely different scenes, or I can even take parts of assets, take them off, and assign them to new assets. But if you were to take all of the assets I've created in 3D for my various projects, you couldn't put them into a nested hierarchy like you can with living organisms or with human languages, right? There wouldn't be one objectively correct way to put these in, or even a small number of objectively similarly right ways, with a whole bunch of other obviously not as optimal ways to arrange all these things, right?
That does sound reasonable, but we don't know everything about how God did the whole creating thing.
Well, right. But the reason I point that out is that when things have common designers, they tend to share common design elements, but not in a nested hierarchy. What tends to happen, at least with human designers, is that they will pull whatever thing they find useful from wherever it happens to be. So, for instance, let's say you had like a small shrew, right? It's a tiny little animal. It weighs less than many insects. So, a common designer could simply put insect wings on a shrew. But we don't ever see any kind of cross taxa borrowing of traits like that, right? Like there are no flying squirrels with feathers, even though that would be useful. There are no dinosaurs with molars and incisors, even though it would be nice for them if they could have that, because it would make chewing a whole lot easier. There are no things that are otherwise marine mammals, but that also have gills to get a little bit of extra supplemental oxygen. So, but those are all the kinds of things that you could do as a common designer. So it seems like all of the things that we expect from common descent are true, but none of the things that couldn't be true with common descent are true. The only things that we don't find are the things that could only be explained by common design. Am I missing that something?
I understand what you're saying, but it's basically something that needs a further field of study.
Okay. That does seem a little dissatisfying, though, from a scientific standpoint, because we're basically producing. So you know about parsimony, right?
Explain.
Okay, so parsimony is basically just the idea that we should go with the idea that requires the fewest assumptions until we have to add more assumptions. So, for instance, if someone says, "Oh, hey, okay, why do things fall?" Well, if we're living in the Stone Age, we can just go with, well, things want to be on the ground. That they just have a natural tendency. Okay. Well, then we realize that the Earth is round and we can measure that things fall at the same rate no matter what. So we propose this universal accelerational force. We call it gravity. And then that works for a while. But then we notice that if the Earth is round and you can accelerate something at a certain speed, ignoring air friction, it could orbit, and that could neatly unify the orbit of the planet. So now we can assume that the planets are also. So as we go, we learn new things, and we do occasionally have to add in new assumptions. But at no point do we simply leap to the, okay, so there's a gravitational acceleration. It must be an army of angels, all named, Jeff. They're all named Jeff, and they all push things towards center of masses proportional to the mass of the two objects they're pushing. Like that, we don't need Jeffries to help us with this. That army of angels named Jeffrey, until there's something that we can't explain without them, why are we adding them into our scientific discussion of gravity? And it seems like there's a similar problem here, where it's like we don't have anything that is particularly indicative of common design as opposed to common ancestry. So why are we bringing it in?
Have you ever played the video game known as Spore?
I have. Actually, me and Beethoven spent a lot of time out in the open ocean playing Spore for hours because there's nothing to do on the open ocean. But so why do you ask?
Because there's a lot of similarities between the way Spore works and what I would consider common design.
I would actually agree with you, yeah. But you see, that's kind of my point, though. If you look at the creatures in Spore, they don't fall into a nested hierarchy. They're a combination of in Spore. So in case anyone doesn't know, Spore is an old it's was it a Maxis game, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, it's distributed by EA, but whatever. Well, I'm not here to complain about EA, even though I could. Anyway, so during the first couple stages of the game, you're quote unquote evolving a creature, and you unlock certain parts, and you can put them on your creature from a predetermined list of parts that the game comes prepackaged with. And I think there were a couple DLCs to add new parts, right?
Right. There was that cute and creepy thing.
Yeah, I remember cute and creepy. I thought there might have been another one, but maybe not. Actually, I really liked it.
Galactic Adventures.
Yeah, but did that add new body parts? I thought it only.
I think it does.
Oh, does it? Oh, okay. But so when I'm playing Spore, right, I can grab any part that I want and stick it anywhere I want on the creature. And okay, now I have a new creature, right? Which means that every time you go and do the little mating dance in Spore, you can completely redesign your creature from the ground up, right?
Right.
But that's not what the pattern of living organisms gives us. So, for instance, in Spore, because there are a number of different wings, there's like a bird wing, there's like a little fly wing, and then I think there's even like a bat wing or something. And they have different levels of how good they are at flying. So if you want to keep upgrading your flying, you can go from the fly wing to a bat wing to a bird wing. But the thing is that if you actually look at the anatomy there, there's no real underlying homology. They're extremely different anatomically, and that's not what we see in living things. So when mammals wanted to fly, and I'm anthropomorphizing evolution here. Please forgive me for speaking metaphorically here. So when mammals, decided that we're going to get good at flying, they didn't do it in the same way as insects, nor do they do it in the same way as pterosaurs, nor the same way as birds. They had to do it in a completely different way. And similarly, when Scansoriopterigids, which were the other group of dinosaurs that were really experimenting with flight, they did it in a way that was different again from bats and birds and pterosaurs and insects. If the pterosaur thing was working before any other vertebrates were flying, why don't all the vertebrates just use pterosaur wings? Or if the bird wing was so superior, why don't they all just use bird wings?
I understand your point, but I think different wings worked better for different animals.
Well, do you have a reason for that?
Well, I don't think pterosaur wings would work very well on an insect.
Well, okay, we can cut out insects for now because the size differences does create some constraints there. We'll just stick with tetrapods. What would be inefficient about a pterosaur wing slapped onto a bird? And we'll assume that, the notarium that comes along with it can also be slapped on there. Or we can give it the coracoideus muscle that actually is used for, upstroke on wings and birds. It doesn't really matter that much. All I really care about is basically from the humerus distally. Why would a pterosaur wing not work on a bird?
I think it would have something to do with the rest of the bird being feathery.
I mean, we can just stick feathers on a pterosaur wing. Pterosaurs basically already had what amounts to extremely primitive feathers. Pycnofibers do seem to have had some homology with feathers, especially after the fairly recent discovery of complex branching patterns at the distal end of pycnofibers. So, but even so, even if we just went with naked leathery wings, I still don't see what it is about a pterosaur wing that just couldn't work for a bird. In fact, it would give birds the advantage of being able to have more efficient locomotion on the ground because pterosaurs could use their front legs their forelimbs to assist in walking, as well as to assist in takeoff. Because one of the problems that birds have is that the joints in their legs get a lot of wear and tear. If they could take some of that pressure off and use a four-legged launch like pterosaurs did and like modern bats do, that would actually alleviate significant joint problems for a lot of birds. So there are some ways in which pterosaur wings are better than bird wings. But
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question.
Okay. There are other things like Nestle 20 points out. I'm going to do a little bit of paraphrasing here. We also have a lot of marine tetrapods of various kinds, right? Like we have, there are sauropterygians like the plesiosaurs, and there are whales, and there are penguins and seals like pinnipeds, sea lions, seals, walruses, that kind of stuff. And they all have flippers, but all their flippers are made out of the forelimbs, and you can tell it's got the same forelimb bones as anyone else. It's got the radius, the humerus, the ulna, the carpals, metacarpal. I don't need to name every bone, but in each case, though, the way that the bones are arranged to make up the flipper is a bit different. But with a common designer, I would expect them to all be more or less the same, essentially, especially since we're starting with the same bones in every case. But if you strip the skin off of or the skin and the flesh and stuff off of a penguin flipper, you get a very obvious bird wing, with the semilunate carpal and the fused phalanges. And if you strip off the feathers, the flesh of, say, a sauropterygian, you get these extremely flat, thick bones with these almost circular phalanges that have multiplied to crazy lengths. And if you do the same thing with a whale, you get rounder bones, far fewer phalanges. You don't get the supernumerary digits that you do with sauropterygians. So it still seems like, again, we're getting this thing where if there were a common designer and he was like, okay, I need an arm to turn into a paddle. I'll just, if I needed that in, say, like a 3D thing, like I need another thing to be the same thing as I needed before, I would just grab the thing I used before. But we don't ever actually see that in living organisms. So it seems like the expectation of common design isn't being met.
I understand what you're saying, but the way God designs and the way we design may be two different things.
Oh, and welcome, Guts. Given, I can't talk. I hope you're feeling well. And she said, "Semilunate carpal with a little dab emoji." Yes, semilunate carpals are amazing. Do you know about those?
I think I've heard of the term before.
It's this cool bone that you get in you derived Eumenoraptoran lineages of dinosaurs, and like if you were to stand and put your arms out a little bit so that your palms face each other and they don't face the floor or the ceiling, right? But they just face directly towards each other, so you could clap. And then you try to rotate your wrist so that the what's now the bottom of your hand, the running along the side of your hand and your pinky, you try to rotate it towards your forearm. You can usually get, like 120-ish degrees or so. But in organisms with the semilunate carpal, these dinosaurs, they could actually get that side of their hand to contact their forearm because of the shape of this carpal bone allowed the hand to rotate that much in that direction. And it's a big part of how birds do things like fold their wings, which is a big part of their flight mechanic. But yeah, that's just what a semilunate carpal is. So, yeah, thought I would just toss it out there since it's really cool. If you look at my debate with Kent Hovind or anybody who hasn't seen that, I put a diagram up and I show it's basically some anatomical drawing showing like why it is used to help fold the arm down that way. But so what is it about common design that we do see that you think is positively indicative of common design? So, because I'll grant you, anything could be compatible with common design, but in order to add it to the theory of evolution, we have to have a reason why we need this extra assumption.
I think all this homology is a very good indicator of common design.
How so?
Well, you see a lot of similarities between different animals.
Okay. But why is that indicative of common design in a way that makes it more indicative of that than of common descent?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question.
Okay. Maybe I can take it a bit away from biology and give an example. So what do I want to use? All right. So I don't know. Do you speak any other languages besides English very well, or even really at all?
I do speak a little bit of French and Spanish.
Do you know the words for father in both of those languages?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay. So in French, actually, for some reason, off the top of my head, I can't remember in Spanish, but in French, it's père, and in English, it's father, and in German, it's Vater, and in Latin, it's pater. And I'm going to go ahead and guess that you can see some kind of commonality here, right?
Right.
And so the thing is, though, that the reason that is, and we can actually look back at even older languages and other things like what was it in Old English and things like that. And what we find is that the reason that all these languages have a similar word for father. Oh, and we got in Dutch is vader. So again, we had another similar sound. So do you think that's because someone came into these languages and shoved a word for father that was similar in each of them? Or do you think it's because perhaps there's a Proto-Indo-European root, or even not even necessarily Proto-Indo-European, but we don't have to go that far into it, but that there's a Proto-Indo-European root that all these languages descend from and take this word from as they go? Because I can tell you the linguists are strongly of the opinion that those words all evolved from the same proto-language with the same word for father in that language, slowly evolving into other languages.
Well, languages do have similarities to evolution, but there are also differences.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I'm just trying to give a non-biological example of why it is that nested hierarchies and homologies don't necessarily imply, in fact, they don't at all imply common design. And so if we want to look at common design, we could do something like if you look at various proposed auxiliary languages, which are languages that people have created intentionally to facilitate international dialogue. They never actually do that. They're always failures. So I don't know why people keep trying, but people have tried. And if you look at, especially the ones made to try and facilitate conversation amongst European speakers, they all tend to do certain things. Like none of them have an extensive gender system for nouns. And they tend not to have any gender, or in many cases, even number agreement between nouns and pronouns. They all tend to be subject, verb, object. They all tend to have particular endings to indicate grammatical category for words. So adjectives will always end in a particular ending. Nouns will always end in a particular ending. They all tend to do some of these things. None of them really do all of them, but they all have these commonalities, and we know that they were designed because we know that we can name the people who designed them. We can tell why they designed them. And we get this hodgepodge of aspects of various languages. So, you borrow from English the relatively simple and barely existing gender system. And in many cases, you just eliminate it altogether. You can borrow from, many times they borrow various Latin endings to just signify part of speech. The verb system is always in these cases strictly nominative accusative. You never get an ergative absolutive interlang, even though there are lots of ergative absolutive or split ergative languages. And so when we see this big dichotomy between designed languages and natural evolved languages. But we don't see anything similar to the design languages when we look at life. We don't ever see anything where we're going to take the cool bits that work from this lineage and the cool bits that work from that lineage and smush them together. But that is what I would expect if someone were to design an organism.
And that would basically come back to the way God does things are different than the way we do things.
I guess, but do you see why that seems like a post hoc explanation?
I understand what you're saying.
Oh, Investor Friday says, I like Dark Knighte Apologeticz. I do too. Dark Knighte Apologeticz is a great guy, and I very much appreciate his presence on the channel. This is just a friendly discussion. I am not trying to, go get him or anything. But it just seems like every time we can identify, okay, well, this is what I might expect if there's common design. We don't see it. And then rather than rejecting the hypothesis, having, had it failed to be supported, we just say, well, maybe it's true anyway. And I mean, the thing is, though, that if that's your attitude, then anything that has failed to be demonstrated, or even that has been disconfirmed, could still be something you take seriously. Like at that point, why isn't it just you can make something up, and then if it fails to bear out, you just go with it anyway?
The current RGB model that we have today, the one that they're proposing right now, isn't the same one that they've been proposing from the beginning.
Oh,
they've made changes to it.
Right. Okay. I mean, but the thing is that when you said, maybe God designs things differently than we do, that's you already to some extent making a change, because, if we start with the basic assumption that known instances of design can be used as an analogy for identifying possible instances of design and seeing if they actually are, And then, well, no, okay, no, we can't do that. And so you say, well, maybe we, design doesn't look designed is basically what I'm hearing. I mean, okay, yeah, you've changed it, but isn't the simpler and more honest thing to just say, well, until we can find a good reason to call something designed, where we don't know if it's designed, but we do know that there are good explanations for it to come about without design, we shouldn't introduce design as an assumption.
I understand what you're saying, and I very much do agree that the RTB model does need a lot of tweaks before it could actually work as a good model.
Okay.
But we're still working on this. It's very much a work in progress.
Okay. I guess that's fair. And by the way, Nestle 20 would like me to point out that if we can say that God designs in his own ways, it goes both ways. So we can no longer tell if something is something that God made. So essentially it becomes God making things becomes indistinguishable from no one making things. Is that, let me know your thoughts on that.
I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. It just doesn't sound right.
Okay, so then how would you distinguish between something that God made and something that he didn't make?
I don't think we would really have anything in the universe that couldn't be attributed to having God made it.
Well, certainly, if you have an omnipotent entity, literally anything could be explained by it. But there's also, if we have explanations that don't require that entity, then it's hard to see a good reason to say, oh, well, we should introduce it. And maybe there are such things. In fact, I'm very open to the possibility that there are such things that we wouldn't be able to explain without reference to some kind of transcendent being. But I would like to know what those things are and how we can tell they can't otherwise be explained. So is there a way to distinguish between God having made something and just the outcome of natural laws and physics and chemistry?
I would think there would be, but I'm not exactly sure what that indicator would be.
Okay. I mean, so for me, what I would expect is something that would violate some kind of process. Like there isn't a possible process that could result in the particular outcome. So, for instance, it would be very hard to say build a planet that actually is supported on pillars, like you get in certain ancient ideas about cosmology, where the Earth is supported on pillars. So if we if we found a planet where, say, the crust was actually held up on solid pillars made of, like, I don't know, iron or something, and there was just a void between these pillars, okay, I would say, well, something would have made that. I don't know if it's going to be identical to any particular conception of God, but it certainly isn't something that formed naturally. You get what I mean?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
So if we want to introduce design where we have a natural explanation that already seems to adequately explain everything we're trying to explain, I still don't understand why we would add that.
I basically accept God as kind of like an axiom.
Okay. Now, generally speaking, the rule of thumb for axioms, or whatever plural you want to use for axiom, at least as far as I can tell, is you use the absolute minimum number of axioms that you need to get by, right? So, like, axioms that I use include things like, my senses are more or less accurate descriptions of an external world. an external world exists. I guess that's even a prior one. So that's another axiom I have. Other people have a internal mental life similar to mine, and also have perceptions that are at least closely analogous to mine, and therefore their actions and perceptions can be understood by me putting myself in their place. That's another axiom. I can't prove that. Why is God a necessary axiom to add on to those?
I'm not exactly sure how to explain that, but it basically goes back to my religious beliefs.
Okay. Which I'm not here to disabuse you of. I'm just curious because I know of people who would say that while their acceptance of God isn't axiomatic, it's based on, say, certain philosophical arguments, or they think it's a good explanation of, the events in first century, what's now Israel / Palestine, what was then the province of Judea, or other such reasons, or personal experience with something that they, had the internal conception of as being some kind of divine or religious experience. And okay, but in none of those cases is God something that they have to assume from the outset. It's always something that they've been convinced of, independent of simply deciding that God existed right away. Why?
Well,
Go ahead.
I was kind of raised in a Christian family, so that may be a little bit different from having discovered Christianity later on in life.
Okay. Does it not seem like simply having family history as the reason to accept an axiom is not a particularly good reason to accept an axiom? Maybe, okay, let me back up a little bit. So the reasons that I accept the axioms that I accept, right, is because without them, I would find it difficult to do anything, right? If I assume that my senses are wildly inaccurate, or that there is no external reality, or that other people do not have a mind roughly similar to mine, I would find it very hard to interact with the world in any way that was coherent and that got anything accomplished, right?
I understand what you're saying, but I find it very hard to logic without the assumptions of Christianity.
Which assumptions of Christianity help with that?
Well, the idea that there is a higher mind outside of the universe
Okay.
helped me.
How does that help though?
It basically makes logic make more sense in that if the ideas of logic are coming from a higher mind outside of the universe, then they're not things that we invented. They're things that we discovered.
Okay. But let's say that we don't make the assumption of a higher mind, right? Let's just say that we make the assumption that the external universe that we perceive exists, and that it has physical properties that are not contingent on our observation of them, which is essentially the idea of object permanence, which is another axiom that we tend not to think about, that we actually have to make. The idea that when I'm not looking at the wall behind me, it's still there. So if we make that assumption, why cannot the laws of logic simply be the outworking of the objective properties of an external universe?
Well, that kind of goes back to the whole idea of the Greek brute realities.
Okay.
But I see one major problem with the brute realities in that they seem to fail at certain points.
Okay. Please elaborate.
I really don't want to make things up like pulling them out of somewhere. But they seem to like hit a wall when you get to certain areas.
I mean, it would be really helpful if we could give just an example. Like what brute reality do you see as hitting a wall, and why does that become a problem for the idea that logic can simply be the result of an external universe that exists as an objective matter of reality?
I'm always really bad at trying to come up with examples myself.
Oh, well, that's okay. But you see, it seems to me like in order to get laws like, say, non-contradiction, right? Or if A then B, if A then B, A, well, okay, then B is true. Or, various rules to do with, I mean, I don't want to go into the logical rules, but I don't see why an external mind is necessary to anchor that. I don't see why it couldn't simply be that, say, if there were no minds, including human minds, it would still be true that a particular rock cannot have a mass of both 1 kilogram and 2 kilograms, no matter how few minds are there to perceive it.
I understand what you're saying, but I see God's mind as a mind that has always existed. It's an eternal thing. It doesn't have a beginning.
Right. And that's the general conception of, I guess, both the deistic and theistic conceptions of a sort of monotheistic God. But my question is, how does that help logic to exist? Because if we conceive of an existence where there is no pre-eternal or eternal or whatever mind, why does that make logic fall apart?
I would have a hard time answering that question.
Okay. I mean, fair enough. I'm not sure that it would. So I guess then it still comes back to, then why are we making the assumption in biology when we don't need to? It doesn't seem like it's helping us explain anything we weren't otherwise explaining.
Well, I guess that would definitely be something that needs further study then.
Well, generally, when things need further study, it's because something has suggested that this is a possibility in the data. So, for instance, like, let's say, I'll use paleontology as an example, right? For a while, it was very unclear exactly how, say, the shell of a turtle evolved, right? Because a turtle has a carapace and a plastron, right? And so we saw some things that had some anatomical features similar to turtles, and they had thick ribs, but does that mean the carapace came first? But then we also found something that's much closer to actual crown turtles recently, and it looked like it had a plastron, but it didn't seem to have a carapace. And so that suggests that there's new research to be done in rocks of the appropriate age to try and find out more about the actual morphological development of the turtle shell. So what suggests that there should be new research is the idea that there is, one, an unanswered question, something we don't currently have an adequate explanation to, and two, something that hints in a direction. So what is inadequately explained without intelligent design, and what hints in a direction that we could investigate to find intelligent design?
That's definitely something I'd have to do further research on. I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I mean, we can't all know everything, but it does seem like if we're going to say we should do more research on that, there has to be a reason, right? Like, no one's going to do research on why it is that maybe flapping really hard could make you fly on Mars? Because there's no reason to think it will. There's good reasons to think maybe it won't. It doesn't seem to be useful. I mean, just like there's no reason to like do research on like, could flies learn to understand Russian? Well, I mean, maybe, but why? What makes you think that's a reasonable avenue for research? So it seems like we're saying, well, okay, maybe this could be true if we research it. Well, maybe, but that's true for an infinite number of possibilities. We can't research all of them. Why is this one the one that should get research?
Yes, I understand what you're saying there, but that goes back to we don't have money to study everything.
Right. But you would like, I mean, I think it's clear that you would like this to be something that gets studied.
Yes, I would.
Why should it be? Like, I'm the skeptical guy who's going to donate money. Well, pretend as if I had money to donate. So let's just pretend I'm a guy who funds research, you know? Surprisingly enough, apparently Newt Gingrich actually funds a lot of paleontology. So we'll just pretend that I'm a Newt Gingrich who's not a politician because I don't like those people. But convince me. Tell me why I should invest my money that I like to see to progress humanity. Oh, and by the way, we have a €5 super chat from Jens van Broekhoven, who gives good advice. Always wash your hands, peace sign. Absolutely. Thank you for your super chat, Jens. It is really appreciated, and it is good advice. And stay safe out there, everybody, especially if you're in one of the places that's getting really hard hit, like most of Italy, New York City. I would say the United States, but the United States is such a vast place and it has such different areas that it very rarely makes sense to actually talk about the United States as a single place. Like the United States doesn't have a crime rate. It doesn't have a murder rate. It doesn't have a infection rate. It has a series of these spread over a huge geographic area. Saying, oh, you're in the United States tells you almost nothing about anything. So, but yeah. Oh, and here's $5 for the research fund from Benthoven for $5. So yeah, there we go. We now have $10 or so that could go towards funding research into intelligent design. All right, convince me. Go ahead.
I would probably fail in that area. I'm not good at persuasion.
Well, I mean, all you have to do is give me reasons to think that this would be a productive line of research.
Well, I do think that if we could find markers of intelligent design, that would definitely have some good advancements in biology.
All right, but it's already seemed to be established that the things that we would the things that at least we see that you think are the result of intelligent design are all in accordance with the idea that they weren't intelligently designed anyway. So what kind of markers could we see? What would we look for?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that question. The markers are, I think they are there, but I'm not exactly sure what all of them are.
Okay, but I mean, it kind of feels like if I said, okay, do you know what a coleopteran is?
Not off the top of my head.
Good. I was hoping I was hoping that would be the answer. Okay, let's say I said, Jeremy, I'm going to pay you $50 for every coleopteran you find and bring to my place in the next month. But you aren't allowed to know what that is. Are you going to bother to try?
No.
Well, then it seems hard to understand why anyone would try to look for these markers of intelligent design when no one has really proposed anything that hasn't already failed as a potential marker that could be found. And by the way, coleopterans are beetles. If you could have looked that up, that would be a really great deal because you could have made a lot of money. But yeah, so why?
I think RTB has made proposals about these markers, but I haven't read very many of their books. I'm planning on doing book reviews of their books on my channel, but
Well, that would be cool.
I'm very broke.
Well, yeah, that's an increasingly common problem, it seems. It's not a good time for people to be spending money on pretty much anything other than absolute necessities, it seems. But from RJ, who, by the way, thank you for stopping in, who, by the way, also has some great books. He's got Evolution Slam Dunk, which is primarily about the sort of, I guess, transition between Pelycosaur grade synapsids up to, I believe, all the way to crown mammals. I might be wrong about that. It might just be to like Mammaliformes or something. But anyway, as well as the rocks were there. So go check those out. Those were both available on Amazon. I believe they're both available as paperback and as Kindle editions. And just in case, RTB is Reasons to Believe, which is Hugh Ross's ministry. So, but he says the RTB authors have never really thought this through either. So, and we get a shout out for Coleopterids from Brainbug. Thanks, Brainbug. Coleopterids are pretty cool. They're also ridiculously speciose. But I guess one thing is, why not dig into the literature or even the secondary sources on sort of the, not just RTB, but like the things like maybe something from the journal Nature or something?
Well, I'm completely willing to change my position if I find evidence that makes me rethink it.
Okay. I mean, that's a very, I think that's a very reasonable stance to take. But what evidence would change your mind?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what evidence in biology would change my mind, but I do know that there was evidence that made me change my mind to leave young Earth creationism.
Well, I mean, that's good, and maybe maybe at some point we should do a leaving young Earth creationism. Although I usually, for me, leaving young Earth creationism usually also involves some kind of acceptance of sort of mainstream biological evolution, and I'm not sure that we're there yet. So maybe not. Maybe we will get there. Who knows? But it seems like without knowing what intelligent design would look like or what a lack of it would look like, how could it be possible to change your mind? Because it seems like your mind isn't really in this place for a particular articulable, not for a reason you can articulate, but because it seems like a good idea for your mind to be here for other reasons.
Well, there might be some emotional reasons for why I've reached this area, but I wouldn't describe myself as someone that is unwilling to look at other things.
Right, but what other things could you possibly look at? Because you've already basically said design doesn't have to look like any design we're familiar with. And just because it doesn't look designed doesn't mean it's not designed. And God can simply insert miraculous mutations in a way that doesn't look like anything out of the ordinary. So it seems like in every single way that we've looked, you have inserted an extra assumption into biology that is, one, neither needed, nor two, falsifiable, nor three, even confirmable. So even under the less restrictive, older version of kind of the pseudo-scientific method, not pseudo-scientific, the early proto-scientific method, which was confirmationalism, which is if you can confirm something, it's a good reason to believe it. And science has sort of moved on to the disconfirm as the thing. Unless you can, once we can't disconfirm it, even though we should be able to if it's not true, then we can accept this. But it seems like we can't even reach any reasonable design conclusion under a confirmationalist idea, where like it seems like this is designed, therefore we think it probably is. We can't even get that far because nothing can seem like it's designed, because everything that we would see as designed, according to the things you've said, actually looks like what we'd expect non-design to look like.
Well, then I think we've hit a roadblock here.
I mean, we may have, but does that not bother you a bit that it seems like you have a position when it comes to biology? And I don't want to make this sound like I'm picking on you. In fact, I really greatly appreciate your ability to leave the young Earth and go to an old Earth and accept the evidence of cosmology and geology and all that. That's a big step, believe me. I took that step. It's not a small one. So I'm not trying to insult you or be mean, but is it not something that you find a little bit troublesome that you have a set of beliefs about a different area of science where your ideas don't actually meet any of the criteria for even imagining a way where they could be confirmed or disconfirmed? In other words, how are they not just made up?
Well, I understand what you're saying, but there is a list of tests that is on the RTP website.
Well, let's why don't we try to pull that up? What's the excuse the clickety clackety nature of my extremely loud keyboard. But I like my mechanical keyboard, so y'all have to just deal with it. But what's the RTB website that I could find this on? Do you know? Like, is it rtb.com?
Reasons.org.
Reasons.org. Okay. What kind of thing could I search for in their search bar?
RTB creation model.
Okay. RTB. Let's see. Ancient galaxies, late heavy bombardment, probably not. Ancient flower. Okay, that might be something, right? Because we're talking about biology, and I don't really think I have any big disagreements with RTB in terms of their astronomy. Or at least if I do, it's minor enough that I don't really care to get into it right now. Okay, so we have the RTB model. Here it is. Okay, humanity traces back to a single woman and a single man. Okay, so that's point one of the RTB model. So this is good. We're getting a model from Reasons to Believe. Humanity's original population size was relatively small. Well, yeah, it would have been 2, wouldn't it? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. You've read more RTB than I have. Is there a difference between 1 and 2?
It would be 2.
Well, 1 says humanity traces back to a single woman and a single man. What's the difference between going all the way back to 2 and having an originally small population size? It seems like it was extremely small. It was 2. Are they basically just restating it?
They're basically just restating it.
Okay, I just didn't know if maybe there was some other idea that I was missing, because, I mean, there could be. Okay, humanity originated in a single location at or near the Middle East. Okay. Humanity's origin date back to between 10,000 and 100,000 years ago. Okay. Humanity spread around the world recently from the near Middle East. All right, well, that tells us a lot about humanity. But I can make a prediction right now based on it that the oldest human artifacts and remains should be found in the Middle East, right?
Right.
But they're not. They're found in East Africa. And I could also predict that human populations today should have the most genetic diversity in and around the Middle East and less going away from it, including less into places like Southern Africa and Eastern Africa.
Well, it is predicted that the Garden of Eden was in what we today know as the Persian Gulf.
Right.
It used to be dry land at one time.
Okay, but it still means that there should be more genetic diversity in places like Egypt and Iraq and Israel and Jordan and Saudi Arabia than there is in places like South Africa or Tanzania. But that's the opposite of what's true. The closer you get to East Africa, the more genetic diversity there is in human populations.
Well, then there was probably something that drove that genetic diversity.
I mean, right, but it seems like that the most likely explanation would have just been the origin of humanity in that area as a species, Homo sapiens originating there. But we also have this humanity traces back to a single woman and a single man. Even at 100,000 years ago, if a population ever is reduced to two organisms, even if they're extremely distantly related, we can just go with they have completely different alleles for every locus where they're non-dangerous alleles, right? Humans still have too much genetic diversity for that, despite the fact that Homo sapiens is actually a fairly low diversity population in terms of other mammals of similar size. Like humans have a very low genetic diversity, but even still, we have way more, or I'm sorry, you have way more, because I'm a dinosaur, way more than we would expect from this. In fact, cheetahs are suspected to have dropped down to a population of perhaps a couple thousand or so in around that same kind of time span. And they are far more genetically homogeneous than humans are. For instance, cheetahs won't reject skin grafts from any other cheetah. You don't have to do any blood typing or anything like that. They have complete skin graft compatibility, which humans do not. You cannot just get a skin graft from any other human. Your body will reject it. So it seems like a number of these are just not adding up.
Well, I do know that at one point in the beginning, RTB wasn't willing to accept the whole humans interbreeding with Neanderthals, and I think now they have changed that.
I did see something with Hugh Ross saying that yes, there was some interbreeding with humans and Neanderthals. Or well, I would consider Neanderthals to be humans, but I guess we could say Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis.
Well, a lot of times when RTB uses the term humans, they're referring to Homo sapiens.
Yeah, and I mean, I get that as a stipulative definition, but it's not how I would use the term. But I mean, I get that that's their preferred usage. I just want to make it clear that some other people in the audience may also use human in the way that I would, and I think it's also the way that is fairly common. And maybe Gutsick Gibbon, if she's still in here, can correct me on this. But I believe that for a lot of people, the term human can be applied to anything in genus Homo, but yeah. All right, well, let's see. Maybe if we search for oh, I'm not in the right. I can't search if I'm not in the right text field. Okay. Common descent. Let's see. Maybe common design test will help, because I would really like to get to one of these tests to see what they expect. Hey, Ed, Intrigue Feline, and welcome back, Vandalia. Okay. Let's see. Common design test. Let's see what we got.
Can I say something to James?
Absolutely.
No, I don't let RTB do the thinking for me. I do think for myself. There are areas that RTB says that I disagree with.
Okay. Oh, okay. How about this? Are biologists willing to test evolution? That sounds pretty good. So let's see. Oh, are you sure that there actually are these tests that they propose for their model? Because I'm having trouble finding it, honestly. And I mean,
I think a lot of their tests are in their books, but I do remember a list of tests on their website at one point.
I'm not disputing it. It's just that oh goodness, I'm having trouble finding it.
Might try searching predictions.
Okay.
Got something caught in my throat there.
Oh, well, be careful. Make sure you sanitize or wash up. Don't want to spread anything. Hold the doomsday predictions, please. I'll agree with RTB there. Please stop it with the doomsday predictions.
Yeah, I don't like the doomsday prediction.
If you want to make your religion look ridiculous, just predict the end of the world in the near future. My goodness. That's one of the reasons why the Jehovah's Witnesses are having so much trouble getting new recruits, is that basically the internet has ruined everything. Because one, everyone knows how absolutely terrible they are as an organization. And two, everyone knows how many times they failed to predict the end of the world, or they falsely predicted the end of the world. Here we go. Here's putting creation to the test. That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that might be the list.
Okay. Primary reasons for our release of the origins of life. Let's see. Here's a brief review of origin of life predictions that flow from the relevant passage of the book 66, or the Bible 66 books. Depends on how you count them, guys.
Yeah, there are 3 canons of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. All right. Life appeared early in Earth's history when the planet was still in its primordial state. Well, we can't use that to distinguish between the sort of standard model and reasons to believe. Life originated in and persisted through hostile conditions of early Earth. Again, I don't know how we would test that. Life originated abruptly. I don't know what that necessarily means. What counts as abruptly? Remains of Earth's first life, when found, will reveal its complexity. Well, that's a good prediction, but that remains to be seen. Life is complex, even in its minimal form. Well, that seems to be something that is actually a bit on the questionable side, because we're seeing things like hypercycles that are relatively simple, but still act in a way that is very similar to how life acts. It actually does now appear, after some recent finds of non-biotic ribose, that the chemical framework for RNA can arise in non-biotic fashions, so that even the earliest genetic material, which is probably RNA, not DNA, is something that we can get without any kind of mysterious creation event. And I don't see any particular reason why, supposing that some ribose manages to stay stable long enough, which again apparently it can, as we found some that was non-biotic inside of an asteroid. I don't see a particular problem for, say, a bit of RNA being enclosed in a hypercycle, and then since RNA can catalyze both protein synthesis and its own replication, any RNA that happened to synthesize even a small protein that was even very barely beneficial for the hypercycle that housed it, why that wouldn't constitute life, and why it wouldn't be any more complicated than simply a phospholipid bilayer surrounding a RNA molecule.
Since we're talking about our asteroids and life coming from panspermia.
Well, not quite panspermia. Panspermia is the idea that life actually arrived on Earth after having developed elsewhere. All I'm doing with pointing out the ribose, because ribose is just a sugar, right? It's a molecule. It happens to be a sugar. And it is the backbone of that's why it's called ribonucleic acid, because ribose forms the ladder on which the base pairs, or not base pairs, but the nucleotides are going to go, right? So you have a ribose backbone for RNA, and then onto that are inserted at intervals these nucleotides.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up in case I was getting confused.
Yeah. So panspermia I get the objection to panspermia. It doesn't solve the problem of the origin of life. It just pushes it off a bit. That doesn't make it false, right? It could still be true. It just doesn't solve the question of abiogenesis. It solves if it were true, it could answer the question, where did life on Earth come from? But it doesn't answer the question, how did life arise in the first place? But all I'm pointing out with this is that ribose can arise and be stable, at least under certain circumstances, abiotically. We now know that that's absolutely a fact because we've seen it. So we know ribose can arise abiotically, and it can, if it's sufficiently protected, remain stable. So,
but have you ever noticed how we have a term, left-handed or right-handed, when it comes to that DNA thing, and how there's certain areas where everything has to be one-handedness versus a different-handedness in certain areas?
Well, that's not ribose, but that is amino acids. So amino acids can be levo or dextro amino acids, and that's because of a thing called chirality, where, like, if you look at your hands, you can't get your hands to match each other in any way other than mirroring, right? Like, you can't get the back of your hand and look at the same back of your other hand and then have the thumb pointing the same way. At least not without some kind of weird birth defect thing or something. I don't know. There's always exceptions, right? But there is the chirality problem. But the thing is that even if we just assume that there's a chirality problem, and so we need to have a single chirality in order for an organism to work, it could simply be as simple as, well, perhaps there were competing proto-life particles using opposite chiralities, and it just so happens that the one that ended up dominating was now I can't remember off the top of my head. I believe life on Earth levo amino acids. So, I mean, that even an explanation as simple as that could simply be it. But there are also ideas to suggest that there actually may, under certain circumstances, be reasons why we should expect certain or amino acids of a certain chirality to predominate, even if only a bit. So even if that isn't viable, that was simply, well, this particular form of proto-life happened to win out. I mean, even then, it's not exactly a huge problem, and it doesn't seem like it's even necessarily that big of a problem. It still is a problem, but it certainly isn't related to the simplicity of minimal life, which it seems like right now doesn't actually have to be much more complex than a hypercycle containing an RNA molecule, which, as it goes around, will consume existing amino acids, which can then be catalyzed to form proteins by that RNA molecule. There are other problems with that. For instance, it's hard to see how something like that could survive except in a very protected environment, and we're not sure what areas on the planet could have provided such a protected environment while still providing the energy gradient necessary for the hypercycle to continue metabolism. But again, that's not a question of, is this completely impossible? It's more of a question of, like, oh, this seems like it's probably possible, but we don't have all of the details. But let's see. Life is complex even in its minimal form, so we got that. Life chemistry exhibits hallmark characteristics of design. Well, it seems like we're at a point where the hallmark characteristic of design is to look like it's not designed. So I don't know. Life differed qualitatively from later plant. First life. No wonder it didn't make sense. I skipped a word. First life differed qualitatively from later plant, animal, and human life. I'm not even really sure what that means. So this model seems like it's mostly vagaries or things that agree with the standard model.
The model might make better sense after reading the books, but
I mean, I'm sure that is true. I'm sure if I read this book, Origins of Life, that they're they're taking this from, it would make more sense. But at first blush, it doesn't seem like something that is going to get any significant amount of research going on. Like, what is it about this model that you think is compelling in terms of we should research it? Because it seems like the only testable model is the minimal, or the only testable part of the model right now is the minimal the minimal complexity of life is high. Okay, but current research seems to be indicating that that might not be the case, and we're already researching into that, and it's not currently trending in a way favorable to the reasons to believe model.
Well, that could be an area where they might make a change to the model.
But if that's the only area really where the model has any significant contradictions to anything that's currently accepted in the sort of standard framework of biology. So if they make too many changes for that, then their model becomes indistinguishable from evolution.
I understand what you're saying, but at least they're doing better than Flat Earth.
Okay, that's true, but it's also a fairly low bar. Most crackheads do better than Flat Earth. So, I mean, they're doing better. They're doing a lot better than a lot of basically anyone in young Earth creationism. And young Earth creationism usually does better than Flat Earth. So, I mean, I will give that to them. They're definitely doing better than a lot of people who are in. They're doing better than the geocentrists. They're doing better than the homeopaths. They're doing better than the witch doctors. Like, yeah, if you want me to list, I mean, if we want to find the people that they're doing better than, yeah, we can find some. That's true. But it seems like, from what I can tell about Reasons to Believe's model, the only places where it actively is going to disagree with current biology are areas where the biology is already trending against them. And if they make any more changes, I mean, I don't object to them just saying, you know what, looks like, biological evolution, common descent, it's where it is. I mean, I would like it if they did that and they could just become like a sister organization like Biologos, which you're familiar with Biologos, right?
Yes, I have heard of Biologos. I do reference them sometimes as basically like a last resort.
Well, so Biologos is a theistic evolution ministry, I guess. And as far as I know, they don't deny common descent, and I don't know if they do, but I haven't heard of them making too many arguments as that current biodiversity must be explained by active, miraculous, intelligent design. But yeah, it just seems like the Reasons to Believe model, from what I can tell, is just the evolution model, except it isn't the abiogenesis model, but their version of abiogenesis doesn't look like what current studies in abiogenesis are pointing to. So maybe I'm missing something, but
yeah, you could just be missing something that is better explained in their books.
I mean, that's fair. Although reading a Reasons to Believe book full of basically what I'm expecting to be ignoring the actual data, failures to fact check, failures to be up to date, at least in biology, it doesn't seem like a horribly useful use of my time. Although then again, I guess where am I going, right? We're all stuck inside for the next few months. So maybe I should. We do have a question from RJ. What is your first resort on citations? Where do you look for first if you want to find out, okay, I want to know about this thing, or I've said this thing and I write it somewhere. Where did I read it? What's your first thing to go to?
Usually Google.
Okay. But what sources when Google pops up? Because you can't cite Google, right? Like if you were writing a paper for class and you were like, "Oh, where did you find out that the this battle took place in this year?" and your answer was Google, your teacher or professor would be like, "No, that's unacceptable."
Yes, I understand what you're saying. You can't just cite Google, but yes, I would look at scientific journals first.
Okay, but like, do you? Because it seems like you go to our reasons to believe first.
I do cite reasons to believe a lot, but it's not like I'm always going to them first.
I mean, that's fair, but like, so like for example, recently I needed some literature about de novo gene evolution, right? So I went to places like the Proceedings of the Royal Academy, the journal Nature, things like that, right? How often do you go and read a actual peer-reviewed study about what you're discussing?
More often than you would think.
It literally couldn't be because I don't think about that. I have no idea.
Well, I do read peer-reviewed journals.
Okay. But you know that none of them agree with reasons to believe in the areas where reasons to believe disagrees with sort of the mainstream interpretation. Like, you realize that, right?
Elaborate.
Like, reasons to believe suggesting that the human population was ever 2. There is no paper in any reputable journal that has ever even indicated that the human population was ever that low. In fact, I would hazard to say that it is something that would be so unlikely that most people involved in genetic studies of humanity would consider it similar in viability to the flat Earth, honestly.
I understand what you're saying, but there are certain things that I just don't think we'll ever find evidence for.
Okay. And I do want to point out one thing. So Nestle20 asks if you can name one peer-reviewed paper you read recently or the most recently. And I don't like asking that question too many times because even if I read a paper 2 days ago, I usually don't remember what it was called. I have to look it up again. So I don't feel like it's entirely fair to put you on the spot about that. Like what was the last paper I read? I didn't read it thoroughly, but I skimmed the formal description of Ocula dentavis that came out not that long ago, and I don't remember what it was called. I don't even remember who wrote it. I just remember that was the last time that I really looked something up. And then I also read through the integument section on the paper describing Eutyrannus, but what was that called? I don't know. I think the first listed author was named Zhu. That's about all I remember about it. I would have to look it up again. I don't like that question, but actually, Nestle does give a what I think is a reasonable follow up. So, what kind of subjects? Like maybe last time you went to a peer review journal, what kind of thing were you looking up?
Well, I do have a big hobby in astrophysics and all the astronomy stuff.
Okay. So yeah, actually that, if I'm being honest, it's a really interesting subject. Oh, TD Lane found the paper I was just reading. Thanks, TD Lane. It's a gigantic feathered dinosaur from Lower Cretaceous of China by Jingzhu Kebaiwang Kezhang Qingyu Ma Lida, whatever, just a bunch of Chinese names. I'm not going to sit here and read Chinese names. But yeah, okay. Thanks, TD Lane.
Why can't they have names like Chad?
I mean, I'm sure they think the same thing about all the Westerners. Like, oh man, Chad. Why can't you just have a normal name like King Yuma? But actually, I'm gonna have that up later because I wanted to look more into the paper, but actually had a little bit of trouble getting hold of it. So much appreciated. So I guess then, and of course we're drawing in towards where we're probably gonna have to cut off just for time reasons, but it seems to me like when we started, you were going with, I want to not have to go against the standard scientific consensus when it comes to science. And I think that's fair. And I think that because reasons to believe, which I think it's fair to say that you're a pretty big fan.
Yes, that would be fair.
Okay. Now, because that is an area of science, the area that you're probably most interested in, which seems like to be astronomy, right? That's an area where they don't really contradict mainstream science. But in the areas where they do are also the areas that you have seemingly less interest in. I wouldn't say you're uninterested. It seems like you are interested to some degree, just not as much as you are with astronomy.
Right.
So it seems like perhaps if you want to be someone who's not going to contradict the consensus in science, and you come across an organization that is contradicting the consensus in science, maybe you should be perhaps more skeptical of them in those areas. And the thing is, it's kind of like, it's like, it's almost like an argument from authority. They can be trusted as an authority, quote unquote, on astronomy. Well, I look at it like this, right? When, say, a geneticist starts talking about genetics, I shut up and listen. But if they start talking about, say, comparative anatomy of fossil vertebrates, I'm much less likely to simply just shut up and listen because that's not their field. They often get things like that wrong. In fact, I've seen people who are very good in certain fields get vertebrate paleontology extremely badly wrong. And I'm no expert in vertebrate paleontology. I'm just a well-read layman in that field. But
I understand what you're saying, but RTB does have 2 biologists working for them.
Well, okay, but Answers in Genesis also has a geologist and a geneticist and a cosmologist, but that doesn't seem to help. And it still seems like wherever RTB has deviated away from the science, rather than checking with the peer-reviewed science about those sections, you continue to check, which I applaud you for. You check the peer-reviewed science about the astronomy and stuff, which is great. You should, especially if that's a thing that interests you. I don't know that I've ever actually read a peer-reviewed study in astronomy. I'm honestly. Oh, and by the way, we have another €5 super chat from Jens van Broekhoven that says, "Thank you for the EU-friendly stream. You're welcome. I try to keep Saturday stuff EU-friendly. Respect from Dark Knighte Apologeticz as well." So there you go. You got a shout out from Jens.
Thank you.
I think you've been great, by the way. You've been extremely polite. No one's getting angry. You're not dodging questions, which is a big problem that we have. Is people like to dodge questions. You'd make a terrible politician, is what I'm saying. Which, by the way, is a very big compliment for me. In case anyone has that as a question, yes, that is a compliment. So I guess now if biology and evolution is something that you don't ever really care to engage with or think about much, then I guess, I mean, whatever. I can't stop that. Oh. Oh, sorry. TD Lane said, "I am angry," from Angron. Yes. Yeah, that is basically his only quotation. But if that is something you would like... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I can't say that I would never look into biology in the peer-reviewed areas,
Right.
but I haven't had any reason to so far.
Perhaps today could be a reason to. Because if science as a whole, as a thing, is something that you care about and you want to be at least reasonably up to date on, I think perhaps today should be an impetus to say, go ahead and look into some of the papers about this. Look into genetics literature about mutation rates. Look into the papers about things like mitochondrial Eve and Y chromosome Adam, because they were neither the first man and woman nor were they contemporaries.
Well, I've about Y chromosomal Adam. I don't think Y chromosomal Adam and biblical Adam have to be the same person.
Well, at least according to the young Earth creationisms, the young Earth creationists, they can't be. If humanity was literally reduced to Noah and his sons and their wives and Noah's wife, Noah would be Y chromosome Adam. So, I actually don't even know. Do you believe in a global flood? We didn't even ask you about that.
No, I don't believe in a global flood.
Okay. Do you believe the human population was reduced to 8, 2 of which were probably not in the child rearing phase of their lives?
I would say no. If there was a massive flood back then, I would say it would probably be reduced down to at least 80%, if not more.
Okay. All right. I still would. I mean, that would still leave us with what, like? I guess I don't want to ask too much about your exact model for what the flood and who was on Noah's Ark. I don't think we really have a lot of time to get into that. But okay, I'm unconvinced that the evidence from just genetics would point there. Although I would say that there are evidence. There is evidence of floods that I think could be considered biblical in proportion, or at least as the large enough to be the basis for such a story. But yeah, look into those things. Oh, hey there, Phage. Yeah, read the genetics papers. Read some of the descriptions of the fossils involved in human ancestry. Take a look at the predictions of reasons to believe, and then compare them to what has actually been found in relevant areas in literature. And I think that you may find that reasons to believe is often either wrong, or the things they're saying are not only unfalsifiable, but in many cases non-confirmable either.
Maybe I might do that as part of my book reviews if I ever get around to doing that.
That would be awesome. I would be curious to see what comes of that. And by the way, Marcus Dresden says, I'm an atheist, but Jeremy is cool. I like him. I like him too. Like, I honestly, genuinely like Jeremy. He is... I find a lot of the people that I talk to about evolution are friendly people, but many of them are also extremely slippery and willing to just wriggle out of any question. And Jeremy is not. Jeremy actually takes questions and tackles them head on, and when he doesn't have an answer, he just admits that he doesn't have an answer. And I really appreciate that, because I think that puts you quite a ways above most of the people who I have disagreements about evolution with.
I have a 5-minute video on my channel about how Christians need to use the words "I don't know" more often.
I agree with you. I actually think most people do. Really, just about everyone needs to use that phrase more, because if you don't know, it's fine. You don't know. The intellectually honest thing to say when you don't know is "I don't know." In fact, people think of me as some expert on dinosaurs, but a lot of times when I'm asked a question, the answer is like, I don't know. Like, a question people always ask that people who are into dinosaurs is, who would win in a fight? And then they list off 2 taxa. And it's just like, I don't know. How would I know that? It's like, who would win in a fight? Tyrannus or Stegosaurus? I'm like, I don't know. Stegosaurus maybe? I don't know. Depends. but yeah, I agree. Everyone needs to be able to be more willing to admit when they don't know. And you've done that actually a fair bit today, which I think is extremely admirable. So, and apparently I'm an expert on fancy dinosaurs. That might be true. that could be true, yeah. But yeah, I think we're gonna wind down. I'm gonna give my upcoming events for the channel. So let's see. Tuesday will be Kent with Bent 21, straight Kentucky bourbon. We're old enough to drink now, so you know. I posted, I believe, on my Twitter the thumbnail for that. So if you want to see the thumbnail, follow my Twitter. The link is in the description. Go follow the Twitter. It will give you channel updates, usually about 24 hours or so before a video comes out or I go live. There will be a tweet about it. So if YouTube sucks, which you know it does, and you want to be notified about my videos, which you probably do if you're here, follow me on Twitter. Let's see. Then Thursday should be another episode of Noah's Zookeeper. Then Saturday, if I get enough work done on the Speculative Evolution project, it will be an update for Phase 2. If I don't, it will be things that aren't dinosaurs about Dimetrodon and other Pelygosaurs to a sort of larger extent. So one of those two things will happen on Saturday. And then, of course, you know, we'll go back into Kent with Bent on that Tuesday, presumably. Currently, I don't have another Eric with Erica scheduled. Another thing is I need to talk to Gutsa Gibbon about when we're going to call it for Kent Hovind having backed out of our debate, which he seems very much to have done. I'm getting basically no returned emails from his secretary. His secretary, last I heard, was still insisting on a full name, picture, and phone number from each of us, which, yeah, I don't think I need to tell you that's completely unreasonable. But if that actually, once we decide that we're going to call it and when we want to do this, my plan is for us to both make a quick little video about the situation. And then I'm going to find a website where we can have a live YouTube viewing session where we can have a chat room and we can all watch the same YouTube video. And I have a playlist set up of Kent Hovind's greatest debate failures. I believe it's 11 videos long. So it's going to be a marathon. So feel free to drop in and come back and whatever. I might set up something if people want to do a super chat style thing where they can like send something with a message and I'll read them off during another live stream or something. I might not, I don't know. I'm probably going to put that in a poll here in the next few days on my YouTube channel. So look for that. That's about it for me. Jeremy, we have your channel linked in the description. Anyone who has enjoyed Jeremy here today, which I think everyone has really, you should go check out his YouTube channel. Look at some of his content. If you like it, why don't you give him a subscription? And what do you got coming up, buddy?
A lot of my channel is Bible study stuff, so I do a lot of that.
Okay.
And the two videos I have coming up are my 100 subscriber specials coming up tomorrow at 5 p.m. And I am also going to be premiering a pro-vaccine video.
Oh, nice. I am extremely pro-vaccine. So there you go. That's pretty awesome. Sometimes I think I should do some kind of pro-vaccine things, but then I think I don't really know enough about that subject to really do it any justice, but I don't know. Actually, you know, T. Lane asks whether or not I would recommend Jeremy go watch Erica's most recent video and critique Genesis Apologetics in the comments. Have you seen that?
What are we talking about?
Gutsick Gibbon, are you familiar with that channel?
No, I don't think I've watched much of that channel.
Okay. Well, it's if you go to my channel page, like the, you know, where you can find like the list of uploads and playlists and whatnot. Over on the right, there's a featured channel. One of them is Gutsick Gibbon. I would go check it out. She is doing a sort of a long form, I I would say it's like a live react because she's recording it as she's watching, but it's also pre-recorded, so I don't sort of a hybrid sort of thing. You know what I mean? But I think you might find it interesting. And I would actually be interested to see what your comments on that would be, because I think there may be some areas where you disagree, and there may even be some areas where I would find your input on that interesting, because I don't know a super lot about all of those topics. And so a lot of it has to do with things like biblical interpretations and stuff like that. So
well, if we're talking biblical interpretations, I was thinking about, you know how Bob the Science Guy, have you heard of him?
Yes.
He recently did a video on a documentary called "The World Upside Down" that kind of it's a ministry that was kind of a mixture between young Earth and flat Earth.
Okay.
I was thinking about doing a review on that video. His focused on the science, but I was going to do it focusing on the theology.
Okay. That could be interesting, yeah. And I'm sorry, I'm just trying to grab. I just got a message from Vandalia1998 who said that Gutsick Gibbon is going to be on his channel in about an hour with Jackson Wheat, who, by the way, is RJ Downard's co-host, but he is sometimes a co-host, but also a co-author on The Rocks Were There. So I am posting a link to Vandalia1998's channel because I plan on being there for that. You should too. And not specifically you, Jeremy. I'm just everyone who's here. You guys should go check that out. That sounds like it'll be a fun thing. And I'm probably going to be contacting Gutsick Gibbon. Probably going to try this weekend, make sure she's feeling well. And assuming that she's feeling well, we'll plan out what we want to do for our video. So, yeah. I think that's it for me. Do you have anything you want to add?
I do have a Twitter.
Oh, yes, that's true. You do. Let me say that out for the audience, and I'm going to be adding it to the description of the video while you do that, because I don't remember off the top of my head.
It's at Batman Jeremy W.
All right, at Batman Jeremy W. All right, that has been added to the description. So now if you guys watch this again later, or anyone is watching it, you know, in the far future of like 2021 or whatever, check the description, because Dark Knighte Apologeticz Twitter is going to be right there. All right, I think that's it for me. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I've had a lot of fun. I hope Jeremy had a lot of fun. Did you have a lot of fun? Yes,
I did have a lot of fun.
Okay, good. Good. And this is what I was hoping for. You know, we could have a nice discussion that wasn't going to become heated or antagonistic, even where we disagree, which I think is the interesting parts. We don't want to talk about everything we agree on. That's kind of boring.
And maybe I could come back for another live stream later on.
It's entirely possible. I mean, right now, I'm trying to leave Saturday as my either I live stream or I upload kind of day. So, yeah, it probably won't be next week that I'm going to do another stream on Saturday, unless it's the Kent Hovind thing. But I'm definitely open to having you back. I had a lot of fun. I would suggest, you know, like we said, go read some of the biology literature. You could even start with some sort of mainstream secondary works and look at the claims that you find interesting or controversial and look at their sources and check those out. But yeah, thank you again. Once again, thank you especially to Jens van Broekhoven and Bent Hoven for your generous super chats. It is much appreciated. I will see you all again at the very least, hopefully on Tuesday, or in Vandalia1998's chat, because I'm going to be there soon. And have a nice day. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur.